Scraptrap, Scraptrap, Scraptrap. The most hated design in FNAF. The subject of many roastings and comparisons to a Peanut and even Jimmy Neutron. But why is Scraptrap of all characters the one to have his design so criticized? It's the poor head. It's the poor head. But in all seriousness, what is it about his design that just didn't resonate with fans? And how do we as a community properly redesign him? I made 2 previous videos on this very topic, one of them even reaching I don't know how many, like 1 million views? But neither of those designs properly fit the bill of what a Scraptrap redesign actually needs. So in today's video, I'm going to discover what the actual problem with Scraptrap is, and how to redesign him properly to fit in with FNAF's design principles. Despite all the critiques from fans, Scraptrap's design isn't actually that bad. The whole body area actually is a pretty good design. He's more thin and skeletal than Springtrap, but this does work in his favor to make him creepy, except when you get to the head, but I'll talk about that later. One thing I especially like about his design is the addition of bones, despite the fact that they are lacking color. His claws and missing arm are also pretty cool, and so are the tangled wires within his suit and the more realistic flesh. Though the head is a bit more of a challenging area, with it having almost no resemblance to the original Springtrap, and a much more unappealing corpse head inside of it. Now don't get me wrong, there are a lot of appealing elements of the face, like the mouth area, especially with the sharp little needle teeth, and the holes in the head revealing his skull, but the head proportions just really throw it off. It looks like it could have been good in the design process, but once it actually got to modeling, something went wrong, and Mr. Scott Coffin didn't decide to fix it. This left poor Scraptrap with a well-designed body and a head comparable to that of a FNAF dangler from 2016. Yeah, remember those? But even with all these flaws, he does actually manage to be a genuinely creepy antagonist to face in-game. His salvaging sections in particular are my favorite out of the salvaging sections in FNAF 6. The shadows obscure the bad parts of his face, making him look genuinely intimidating. Overall, in-game, his design actually is effective. A lot of people probably wouldn't have even noticed any of the weird design choices until he's brought into full light, which was never really intended. And this is, of course, not helped by the many of absolutely awful fan renders out there, which highlight his imperfections and make him look far uglier than he actually is. Overall, I think the actual people have with him is not his store head size, but his downgrading from the absolute peak that was Springtrap. Or maybe I'm just biased because Springtrap's my favorite character. This has led many redesigns, including my own, to discard most of Scraptrap's actually good design in favor of one that is a natural progression from Springtrap. Though, as we'll see in the next section, that's not actually how FNAF designs work. In my research on how to make the best Scraptrap redesign I could possibly do, I came across a pattern between withered animatronics and FNAF. This particular rule, which I call the Scrap Baby Principle. What is the Scrap Baby Principle? The Scrap Baby Principle is the principle of design of which all withered FNAF animatronics follow. It basically states that all withered animatronics must look like their original counterparts, but have noticeable differences that separate them from their original counterpart. Good examples of this are the rule's namesake, Scrap Baby, and her original counterpart, Circus Baby. While Circus Baby and Scrap Baby look extremely similar and are obviously meant to be the same character in different stages, they still have obvious differences and aren't just natural progressions of each other. Scrap Baby is thinner and more feminine looking than the original Baby, having a more similar frame to Melora rather than the original Circus Baby. Her face, while being very, very similar to the original Circus Baby, has a lot of differences and isn't clearly the same model, just taken and withered. Another good example is Molten Freddy, who also follows the Scrap Baby principle. Though most of his body doesn't have any suit on it, his head does, which is a good example, since it looks a lot like the original Funtime Freddy, but it's obviously different, especially with the face plating and other things. All the withered animatronics from FNAF 2 follow this principle too, with each and every one of them sharing a lot of similarities with their original while being still obviously different animatronic models. Though this principle has gone mostly unused in the newer Steel Wool games, it still even be seen with Burn Trap, who surprisingly actually does follow the Scrap Baby principle. But does Scraptrap follow the Scrap Baby principle? No, he does not. He does still share similarities with the original Springtrap, there isn't enough similarities to make him count. So in order to properly redesign him, we need to stop prioritizing actual logic and do it the way FNAF does it. Simply give them a new model that's similar enough to the original for you to look at it and be like, hey, that's the guy from the other game, but different. So he shouldn't look like a natural progression of Springtrap. He should look like his own original character who has merely a few more similarities with the original Springtrap. Now to the redesign. My original redesign did not follow the Scrap Baby principle. It followed real-world logic. The logic that is, if something gets more broken, it looks more broken. But FNAF isn't the real world. And in FNAF, if something's more broken, it looks totally different. And this is not Scraptrap. This is just Springtrap missing an arm and replacing it with a knife. And that is not what a proper redesign looks like. What am I keeping from this redesign? The missing eye is pretty cool, and so is the knife arm, as well as the working in of more metal bits, more similar to Scrap Baby's endoskeleton rather than Springtrap's original endoskeleton. Like both the original design and my original redesign, this Scraptrap design is going to have claws, but I'm going to make them more similar to Burntrap's claws in that some of them are bony claws and others are metal. I also liked the more realistic bones from mine and the burned texture. So now we have some ground rules, and it's time to make my redesign. So this time, instead of making an edit, I'm going to do a fully original illustration, because I find it easier than having to manipulate all those pieces, and it'll look more artsy. So first, I'll start by making a rough structure that combines both the proportions of the original Springtrap and Scraptrap. The body proportions are mostly the same, while the head is smaller and has less of a forehead of massive scale, and is more shaped like the original Springtraps, though it will have a shape more similar to that of a withered animatronic rather than the perfectly round head that the original Springtrap had to keep things varied. While my original redesign had the same amount of ear missing that the original Springtrap did, I'm going to have his left ear almost fully missing like on the original Scraptrap instead of on my original redesign. He will also be missing his pelvis piece because Dark Springtrap, a very little known version of Springtrap that breaks the Scrap Baby principle far before his time, was missing his pelvis. And a little consistency doesn't hurt here and there, even if FNAF isn't consistent. So now that we have a basic structure to work off, we'll add the details. First of all, we start with the face. Referencing pictures of the original Scraptrap and the original Springtrap, I will make a face that is a perfect middle ground. His head is going to be more fitting with the rest of his body, and a head shape that would fit in better with the withered animatronic, like I mentioned earlier. Make his eye shape more similar to the original Scraptrap than the Springtrap, and give him more similar eyelid shapes. His snout will be smaller than the original Springtrap's. I'll also give him whiskers, because I can. Instead of Scraptrap's original lone buck teeth, I'll give him the bigger rabbit buck teeth, in addition to more teeth that are also extremely crooked. The lower jaw will be similar in shape to that of, I don't know, Withered Freddy, and I'll give him those tiny, sharp needle teeth, because they're cool. His facial withering will be more similar to the original Scraptrap, the piece on the side of his head missing, and the big chunk out of his forehead. Though since his forehead has less space, the chunk will be connected to his eye. Now onto the ears, I'll make them bigger and more similar to Springtrap's ears, except for the left ear, which is actually his right ear, which will have a similar type of endoskeleton sticking out of it and will be far more withered like the original Scraptrap. Side note, I noticed that it's out of sync with the screen recording, and I'll add in wires later. Now to do some withering for the body, it will be entirely different from Springtrap's withering, but as close as I can get to Scraptrap's withering. I'll add in his skeleton, his endoskeleton, made of parts similar to Scrap Baby's endoskeleton, and lots of wires. Can't forget his claws and his knife arm. Now with the rough sketch done, I'll simply do an outline and then color. The colors in particular will be more similar to Scraptrap's color palette than the original Springtrap. I'll use a special watercolor brush to brush on colors in a way to make them look burnt, more similar to Springtrap's, to add on Scraptrap's color scheme on top, adding color variation. Then some rust, blood, and flesh tones, and he's done. And here it is, the final design. It addressed the problems Scraptrap had while keeping his good elements and following the scrap heavy principle. Now not only does he fall in line with Springtrap's design, but he also fits in with Scraptrap's original design. What did you think of this video? Did you learn something new about how FNAF designs work? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends.